I was asked by Nick Jensen and Patrick Parkinson if I would say a few words which could be used perhaps at the beginning of a conference that I believe you're holding entitled Rebuilding Right Relationships, Next Generation Thinking in Public Policy in Australia. I should say first that I do have some legitimacy in the sense that my grandmother came from Sydney and I have quite a number of relatives currently living in Melbourne. And I love Australia. I've been to Australia quite a number of times. So it is really a delight to contribute in some small way to discussion of public policy in Australia. A particular friend of mine has been Lindsay Tanner. I know he's on one side of the political spectrum, but Lindsay Tanner's been a friend for a long time, and we've discussed many Australian issues, and he has written several books based on the relational approach to public policy that I'm talking about here. My own journey into thinking about how you design public policy from a Christian perspective goes back a long time, actually to the 1970s when I was living in Africa, in Kenya, and I was searching for an answer to the question, is there a Christian alternative to capitalism, Marxism and socialism, which had been put to me by a number of students at Nairobi University. And my pastor suggested that I should go back to biblical law, Old Testament law, where God explains to Israel the best way to design a society if people fundamentally, like Israel at the time, were not believing Christians. Well, we're not believing in God, because Christ, of course, had not come at that time. So I went into a study of Old Testament law, and when I had finished that, the major question that I was confronted with was, what holds all these laws together? There are so many laws, and if capitalism is about how you organize capital in a society and socialism is about what is the role of the state, in Christian or biblical thinking, what's the big idea that holds laws together? And I realized that Jesus had answered that in Matthew 22 when he's asked the question, which is the greatest commandment? And you will remember his answer to that question, which is the greatest commandment, was love God and love your neighbor. And then he says, on these two laws hangs all the law and the prophets. Jesus couldn't summarize it in one word. He summarized it in these two connected ideas, love God and love your neighbor. And love, I came to realize, right back in 1981, is not about money or finance or power. It's about the way people relate to one another. Love is a word that describes a quality of relationships. So that's how I tumbled into this whole relationships approach to public policy. So then I had to say, well, what can we learn about how to design a relationally based public policy from what the Bible itself teaches? And for the last 40 years or so, I've been trying to work that through. What does relational education, relational healthcare, relational finance, relational business, what does that look like in different political, economic, cultural contexts? And since a number of countries are involved, not just Britain, but Australia and countries in the EU and so on, and because politics anyway and culture are constantly evolving, you can see this is a never-ending task that I've landed myself with. And I must say it's been extremely rewarding in many respects, but this is work in progress, and I hope it will feed into your thinking. I think at a community level, one has to realize first that there are many different ways of defining what a community is. So is a community, are we talking about a community of people who play games on the internet or something like that? Or are we talking about a community in a locality sense where people live in proximity to one another, they have interactions of various kinds? Or we could be thinking about specific kinds of locality community, like a church-based community, for example. Well, I'm going to be, in what the remaining part of what I say, I'll be talking about a locality-based community, which is a locality in a geographical sense rather than being tied to a church or to any other particular reason for meeting, if you like. Although I think what Christians have to say about this has a particular relevance. So here are a group of people who are drawn together for all sorts of reasons to live in a particular place, and they have neighbors that they may have known for years, or they may have only met recently for the first time. And these are people of different ages, different interests, different cultural backgrounds often, particularly in the Australian context, I think. So the research we did in Cambridge over quite a number of years or decades now has been to try and say, well, what does it mean to build a relationship? What are the different components in a relationship? And we came to the conclusion there were 5 major aspects in building a relationship. The importance of meeting face to face, and people talking face to face rather than on the internet through an email connection or something. The advantage is if you meet face to face, you get the body language, you get the facial expressions, all of those things in a much more nuanced way than if it's across the internet. The second issue is how long have people known each other. The longer you know someone, the more able you are to interpret how they're feeling and what they're communicating. Then we talk about the many-sidedness of the relationship. Its multiplexity is the word we use. How wide or deep is your knowledge of this person in different contexts? Multiplexity, many-sidedness. And then the fourth area we look at is whether there is mutual respect and participation in decisions. We call that parity in our language. Is there a sense that people are treated more or less as equals, or as at least as of equal worth? And lastly, is there a sense of shared goals, shared interests, shared values? How much commonality is there between people? Now, this drives then a whole set of policy issues that relate to communities. One example is the design of housing, because people meet face to face much more often in horizontal space if they're living along a street from one another than if they are in vertical space in a high-rise building. So that tends to make us feel if you want strong relationships in cities, you avoid high-rise buildings. Also, the more responsibility is given to a locality, the more reason there is for them to meet and talk to one another. So if there is, let's say, some vandalism to a car in a neighborhood, the question then is, who sorts out that problem and who decides the appropriate punishment? Now, it can either go up to some district court somewhere, perhaps quite remote from the locality, or it can be sorted out by a neighborhood or community group who meet together, decide the circumstances of the offender. It may be a young man, 18, who has slashed somebody's tires, and that's simply because he's thoroughly fed up with the way he's neglected, with the way the community operates, where he feels excluded, and he's simply trying to take some form of revenge. Or it may be a much more sophisticated form of criminal activity. But it's important that the community evaluates who did this and what their motivation was in doing it, in order to decide what is really an appropriate and effective punishment that is not going to simply fuel crime in the future, but perhaps could sort out a young person's life on a long-term basis. So we call that restorative justice rather than, or relational justice, as a particular way of characterizing this way of dealing with crime. But there are many more areas where communities can and, in our view, should get involved. Where can Christians play a role in policy innovation to increase trust and neighborhood connections? And I've only listed 2 or 3 here as illustrations. In our community in Cambridge, we have a lot of people coming from overseas who don't speak English very well. And our local church has got involved and my wife's involved, so I know all about it, in running English classes on Saturday mornings to help recently arrived immigrant families as they struggle to get to grips with the English language, which we all know is particularly complicated and perverse in its spelling, so that they can engage more easily with the culture and community around them in Cambridge. In regards to healthcare, there are many ways in which churches can help vulnerable people in terms of their health situation. They can visit older people, for example, to make sure that they remember to take their medicines. They may help people with aspects of the healthcare system that even in Britain with our National Health Service are not covered well, such as pedicure. And they can perhaps help local people as well with tidying up their gardens and ensuring high levels of hygiene in the house. And of course, Christians can also help just by helping to ensure people are not lonely, because I think a recent statistic I saw said that 1 in 4 Australians believe that or feel that they are lonely. And that is a shocking statistic if it's true, but even if it was nearer to a kind of British figure of 1 in 10 older people feeling lonely, it would still be a shocking figure that somehow our community links are so weak today in capitalist or Western orientated free societies that people feel that level of isolation. So social support can be thought about systemically or systematically at a local level as well. And one town that's been doing this well in Britain is called Knaresborough. Knaresborough is K-N-A-R-E-S, borough, Knaresborough. You can look it up online, and they take an inventory of people's time and skills that are available for neighbourhood activity and look at the needs of the locality as well and try and match the availability of skills with the places where there is particular need for those skills. So Christians, with their belief in the fundamental importance of relationships, can undertake these kinds of activities and make it clear that the reason they're doing it is because they believe in a relational God, a God who is internally in relationship with one another, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that they believe a relational God has in his creation characterized it at every point by the importance and need of relationships between people, and explain that the key to healthy relationships in society is, first of all, that society and every individual recognizes the importance of their relationship with God, who longs to have a relationship with them because he loves them. So I think that provides a coherent foundation for Christian activity in this area, as well as providing an agenda for that activity. And I do commend it to you to think through those issues, talk through those issues together, which is a relational thing to do, and as Christians to pray through those things together and see what kind of relational activity you can undertake in your communities. Thank you.